start off with Peyton Manning, Calvin Johnson, Torrey Holt, Reggie Wayne, Alan Faneca, Tony Baselli, Jared Allen, Richard Seymour, Zach Thomas, Clay Matthews Jr., not to be confused with Clay Matthews III, Sam Mills, that guy was a heck of a player, huh? Charles Woodson, Rondé Barber, John Lynch, and Leroy Butler. What a list, and what a defensive back list. What's our feeling here, Peter?
Yeah, it's almost one of those lists where you could throw all 15 names into a hat and pick out 5, and you can make a case for whichever 5 you choose. And whilst that's generally the case most years, this looks like one of the strongest classes I've seen in a long time in terms of the complete 15 there.
Yeah.
Obviously excited to see the two Packers there, Woodson and Butler. And again, obviously very excited to see Clay Matthews Jr. finally make that final 15.
Yeah. Do you think that some of the voters got that ACME Army push when we were posting on our Twitters? Because we got a couple hundred followers that were really, really, really making some moves there. Happy for Clay Matthews Jr. Shout out to all my family in Cleveland and Browns fans around the world. Guys, it's hard to imagine Peyton Manning not getting in. He's the first ballot Hall of Famer, no question.
Unanimous.
Okay, let's get that out of the way. So, I look at Charles Woodson and I look at Leroy Butler, and this is the only jersey I've ever owned. This is number 21, throwback jersey. Charles Woodson. I can't imagine him not getting in, but that might be Homer feelings. Calvin Johnson, Torrey Holt, Reggie Wayne.
Calvin Johnson.
That class of receivers, if there was one to go in, Calvin Johnson. Feel that way as well, Peter?
Yeah, if one of them goes in, I'm not
sure any of them go in.
Now, just because of the numbers, but if it were me, if one of them goes, it's Calvin Johnson.
Yeah. So that's a questionable position. This one, literally, Alan Faneca, Tony Baselli. People on Twitter were saying, "Who's Tony Baselli?" Laughing. The kids right now today don't have an idea about who the mountain Tony Baselli was. Let's talk about those two.
Well, yeah, and both offensive linemen, but different positions. Faneca's career was a lot longer than Baselli's, and I think generally speaking, I think tackles tend to have an advantage over guards because the guards get caught in the mix a little bit in that interior offensive line. But for me, if it's one of those two, it's Faneca, and I think part of that is based on the fact that he's been a finalist and been in the top 10 for the last I don't know how many years, and this whole thing tends to be a process. When somebody makes that final 15 and then makes the final 10 year after year after year, consecutive years, eventually they either drop off this list or they get in, and I think Faneca will get in.
Yeah,
and well deserved as well.
I think he's right. Both of them are legitimate Hall of Famers. Both of them belong in the Hall, but I don't think you're going to go with both of them. And I would say that Faneca's maybe more deserving just based on longevity alone. More years at a high level.
Wasn't he plowing the way for the bus?
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to see running backs get into the Hall of Fame without, someone on their line going as well, because there's a reason they got a lot of those yards. Let's move on to the defensive side here, because Jared Allen, Richard Seymour, Zach Thomas. Let's talk about those guys. 2 defensive ends and a linebacker. Does Jared Allen deserve to be in the Hall of Fame first ballot?
He's one of those guys that I think deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, but I'm not sure in a normal year he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. But I don't think there's much to choose between Jared Allen and Richard Seymour. I would have a question mark against both of them just because of the numbers. I would have no problem, absolutely no problem if either of those guys got in. But given all of the other players that are potentials, Manning and Woodson for me, are absolute certainties, and that just leaves you the 3 spots. As I said, I think Faneca gets in, so now we're down to two.
Yeah.
And so, to me, there's very little to choose between Allen and Seymour.
Mm-hmm.
Seymour played on more successful teams,
and
that may swing it in his favour if it were to be one of those two. But I'm not 100% convinced either of them get in this time around.
Yeah, well,
I think you go 0 for 3 on those 3 guys this year.
Yeah, I just remember Jared Allen being the 2-time-a-year headache. We had to face.
Worst hair in the history of the
come
NFC.
on, man. When he threw the handlebar mustache on top of that mullet with the shaved sides, man, I was down. Cowboy Allen. All right, yeah, I agree. Zach Thomas as well from a linebacker position, and Sam Mills. These are 2 linebackers I don't see in the same stratosphere, literally, as Clay Matthews Jr. at all.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about Sam Mills, and it's difficult to work out whether this is an advantage or a disadvantage. He played in that New Orleans Saints, the Dome Patrol linebacker group that had Ricky Jackson and Vaughn Johnson and Pat Swilling on the outside. So a complete group of, one of the strongest groups of 4 linebackers that you will see anywhere. But I'm not sure that necessarily helps an individual case.
Yeah.
Again, he's a guy, sadly no longer with us, which is, really sad. But a guy that would be deserving if he were to get in. But I would imagine that Zach Thomas is higher in the list than Sam Mills.
That's God calling, saying, "I'm not sure. Let's rethink that."
Okay, so I would imagine that Zach Thomas is slightly higher in the list than Sam Mills, but I don't think either of those two probably gets in.
Yeah.
As for Clay Matthews, obviously we'd love to see Clay get in. I think he's absolutely deserving for all the reasons that we've talked about before. I think at the very least this gets him the opportunity to have his case heard. And I think that's really important. There's lots of, I know that Jennifer has spoken to lots of the voters, and there's lots of very supportive noises if he got to that final 15. So I think he's got a shot. Whether he makes it, I don't know. It would be unfortunate if he didn't, because he's then into the senior thing, and we know with Jerry Kramer how long that process takes. Yeah. So for me, Clay Matthews is probably a 50-50 shot at getting in.
All right, now we move to some defensive backs here, because we got Charles, we got Rondé Barber, John Lynch, and the Lambeau Leap inventor Leroy Butler. That's a tough list to really, because I know there's so much sway on or so much siding with the John Lynches, the supporters of John Lynch. I think Rondé Barber, he's got the toughest case of the 3. But Charles Woodson, again, we talked about, he's certainly in. When we put Lynch, Barber, and Butler up against one another as a potential last entry, how does that shake out for you, Peter?
I'm pretty certain that one of Lynch or Butler gets in, but not both. But I think that one of them will definitely get in. I'm sad to say that I think it will be Lynch, not because I think that's the right choice. I don't believe it is. And Leroy Butler's the only remaining player from that 90s all-decade team who's not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He will go in eventually, but I think the case for John Lynch has been built over 5, 6, 7 years, and again, it's a little bit similar to the Alan Faneca situation, where guys that have been there for that amount of time and been finalists for that amount of time, and John Lynch has kept himself in the public eye with his work at San Francisco, although that shouldn't be a factor. It helps, and I fear that it's Lynch over Butler this time around.
Well, in my eyes, obviously from a Homer perspective, Butler and Woodson are by far the most deserving of that group. Charles Woodson is going to be elected to the Hall, and unfortunately, I kind of tend to agree with Peter's assessment. I don't think there's ever been two guys from the same defensive backfield, or two defensive backfield guys from the same team getting in the same year. And I think that maybe tips it towards Lynch, although Lynch is not as deserving as Leroy Butler is.